When people come to me, tell me they plan on getting married, and ask me for the best advice that I can give them, and by the way, they don't do that nearly as often as they did back in the day when I was a pastor. But when they do, my response is this: two things. Number one is don't marry a jerk. Number two is don't be a jerk. So if you don't marry a jerk and you're not a jerk, you are not a jerk, then you're going to get along just fine. Typically. I mean, there are always exceptions to every rule, right? But that is kind of the core of the basis of what we're talking about today, which is, why is it that neurotypical people resent Aspies? Well, we can come up with one of two reasons. First reason is because the other person is a jerk, and the second reason is because the person with Asperger's is a jerk. And if you put both of those together, then you have a relationship made up of two people who resent each other. How far is that going to go? The answer to that question is it's not going to go very far. Now, with that said, let's take a look at four things that we need to understand when we are trying to comprehend neurotypical people resenting us, those of us who have Asperger syndrome. Now, I was going to say because we have Asperger syndrome, and I kind of changed that because they may not know that we have Asperger syndrome. Now, they still resent us because we have the traits of Asperger syndrome, but it's not specifically because, well, I heard this guy is autistic, so I'm not going to like that guy. It's not that kind of rejection. All right, number one is because that is the way they are hardwired. That is so obvious. It's one of those things that are so obvious that sometimes we don't even think about it. We often say that people with Asperger syndrome are hardwired to be the way that we are, and we all understand that if you have Asperger syndrome. But sometimes we overlook the fact that everyone is hardwired. Every person on the planet has a core personality. They have neurological neurological complexity that makes them who they are. So everyone is hardwired. And sometimes the configuration of wiring, and of course there are no literal wires in your brain, but those who are neurotypical have this brain condition, I guess is the best way to say it, that makes them the way that they are. And yeah, we got free will, we can make some changes, but still that core personality is still there. So if you take a dog and a frog, they're going to act like a dog and a frog. The frog is not going to act like a dog, the dog's not going to act like a frog. Why? Well, because nature configured them to have brains that are hardwired to do what they need to do to survive, and that is true of neurotypical people. Now, I'm not going to say which one is a dog, which one is a frog, but you get the point. All of that is kind of obvious, right? But it's one of those things that we don't stop and consider. So when you're out and about, or maybe just when in a close relationship with an individual, and they are responding or reacting with resentment, you need to keep in mind, and where did that come from? It's because that individual is hardwired to do that. Now, that's not a justification for them misbehaving. That's why we have laws in an organized society. That's why we have police to enforce those laws, law enforcement. That's why we have jails. That's why we have programs, we call it correction facilities, because their behavior needs to be corrected. So I'm not saying that all behavior is justifiable because it's inherent, nor am I saying that bad behavior should be overlooked or just because they can't help it. Sometimes that's true, but what I am saying is once we understand that neurotypical people are hardwired to be neurotypical people, we come to understand why they behave the way that they behave. Why is it they resent us? Now, you got to keep in mind they're resenting other people. It's not personal, usually. Sometimes it may be, but that's typically not the case. Number two is this: we're just not the same. So there comes a point when we are so different, even though it seems like, yeah, you're pretty much the same critter, same animal, right? You put us together and still we don't get along. Have you ever tried to take a road trip with somebody who disagreed with you? Have you ever tried to have dinner with somebody who disagreed with you? And all they want to do is argue the whole time. Some people, doesn't matter what the topic is, could be religion, could be politics, could be sports, whatever. But people tend to sink into this mode of sarcasm, and sometimes they get mean-spirited and hateful. Sometimes they get angry, whatever. That's the way people are. Again, that's how they're hardwired. But sometimes we have to acknowledge that we are too different to get along with this individual. Now, I'm not talking about in a broad sense. Well, yeah, we need to try to get along with everyone, but the best analogy that I could come up with is rather, there is a verse in the Bible that says two can't walk together unless they be agreed. And you imagine two guys walking down, I don't know, Roman road 2,000 years ago wearing their togas or whatever they wore, and they're having an argument, but that's not the picture that we are presented. What we are presented is a well-known fact that if you take two oxen and you yoke them together to plow the fields or pull a cart, whatever you're doing, one thing that is critically necessary is that those oxen be agreed in stature, and in strength. That is to say, they have to be basically very similar creatures. Otherwise, you're going to have real problems. So the stronger oxen, if they're not agreed, the stronger oxen, you're plowing the field, and he will pull stronger than the weaker oxen, and the furrow is not straight. Maybe they're pulling a cart, and the dominant oxen pulls the cart into a ditch. Two can't walk together unless they be agreed. So we need to understand that basic principle and apply it. So sometimes we need to give ground and try to be agreeable. So the reason that they find us so disagreeable, so they resent us so much, is because they are pulling at a different pace. They have a different perspective on life. That many times cannot be avoided. I mean, it just can't be. I know you've probably experienced this too, but I've had experiences where I just walk into a room of people, and literally within seconds, I mean, upon sight, there are people who are resentful. They just don't like me. There is something about me that they pick up on. Now, that could be autism, could be something else, but they pick up on something about me. I was going to be funny and say they're jealous because I'm so good looking, but I better not say that. But yeah, I had a job when I was in my early 20s, and I went to work at a Kentucky Fried Chicken, and the idea was I wanted to learn the business because the owner had stores that he wanted to sell, different restaurants he wanted to sell. So maybe if I learned the business, I would be a prospective buyer. And when I walked in the door, they had this manager. Psychopath, narcissistic, histrionic, Machiavellian, just a middle-aged woman, you know. She didn't like me. I have no idea what it was about me specifically. She just didn't like me. And that wasn't going to work. My theory is, and this could have nothing to do with autism, but my theory is that I've seen this before other times. If an owner of a business goes over the head of a manager and hires somebody without consulting her or him first, then the manager is very resentful of that person. I've seen that happen several times. But the point is, if you have Asperger syndrome, chances are you have experienced this multiple times. When you walk into a room, and I may start it in, when you first went to school, walk into a room and there's somebody, maybe not everybody, but there's somebody who picks up on your differences. They got this radar. They can just tell. Could be your mannerisms, could be the expression on your face, maybe the lack of expression on your face, and they don't have time to think about it. It's just instant. But that is the principle, that we've got to be agreed, and if we're not agreed, there will be resentment. The neighborhood I grew up in Indianapolis, by the way, and we had neighbors who were a different religion. But we got along just fine because we didn't emphasize religion. That's why I don't talk about religion on this channel, politics, that type of thing, because inevitably it's going to divide people. And these folks in Hollywood, they have their political agenda. Well, cool, but they need to understand they're losing fans, which is their customer base. Think of it from a business perspective. They're hurting themselves, but maybe they're rich enough they get away with it. I don't know. But, we grew up in a neighborhood where basically everybody got along. We didn't have that at all. But there are other neighborhoods I've lived in where people, they just, usually there's one person who thinks he or she is, like the neighborhood mayor. And this person sometimes will see himself or herself as a judge of values or whatever, or maybe they just don't like your grass, or maybe they don't like your trees, or maybe they just don't like anything. People, again, they're just like that. So, that's part of life. We need to accept it, but that doesn't mean we have to tolerate abuse. Number 3 is this: put yourself in their position. Now, when I wrote that down, when I was putting together my notes, the thought occurred to me, one of the reasons we're resented is because that is very difficult for us to do, to put ourselves in other people's positions. We don't know what they're going through. We don't know what they're thinking. We don't know what their line of thought is. And if you're trying to work with somebody and you're not picking up on those nonverbal cues, and they think you should respond this way, and you responded that way, or more likely you just didn't respond. First time they may overlook it, but if that continues, they say this person is a problem. So they will resent you because, well, that's the way they're hardwired. And they do the same thing. They don't have any empathy themselves, otherwise they would try to tolerate you more so than they do. And a lot of neurotypical people do that. By the way, we have this thing called awareness, autistic awareness. Obviously, that's a good thing. But people are aware of autism, but they are not empathetic. It's kind of like, you're aware that your children are hungry, but you don't care. That's kind of a silly example, I know, but that's the way some people are. So they have the awareness, they have the knowledge, but as we like to say, they don't have the wisdom to do something about it. Number 4 is the outcome from the perspective of the person with Asperger syndrome, with the person who is autistic, is often resentment and or avoidance. So they resent us and we resent them because they resent us. Does that make sense? Yeah, I think it does. And we don't like being resented. We don't like resenting others. Well, I don't think you do. At least I don't. Many of us don't. Maybe you like to resent people. Maybe you like to fight. I don't know, but I'm just assuming you don't like that. So what do? You can't avoid the disagreement. You go to the workplace, you go to school, you go to the family reunion. You're a different size oxen. And all these other oxen are pulling together. Well, some of them are fighting. That's going to happen. But it seems like you are always in a position where you're just misyoked with other people. So what to do? Well, it happens at school, happens at church, happens at the workplace, happens in the neighborhood, happens where else do people gather? So what do? It's going to happen. So just stay away from them, right? Avoidance. I'm not sure that avoidance is a good thing, but I'm not sure avoidance is a bad thing. I'm kind of in the middle where, I will intentionally avoid some social circumstances, particularly if I know there's a toxic person there. And that is the very definition of avoidant personality disorder. So maybe I got it, but what are the choices? Have you ever had one of those spells where your, ruminants is just in the forefront of your mind because you had a bad experience, and you're thinking to yourself, if I had never had that experience right this very minute, I would not be ruminating. So my strategy of avoidance, which I'm not recommending, I'm just explaining, my strategy of avoidance is, I'm avoiding not just the bad circumstance, but I'm avoiding ruminating about the potential bad circumstance for the rest of my life. Yeah, that's a bit extreme. It's kind of like saying, I'm never going to drive again because, you could have an accident. People get killed out there on the highway. Very tragic, very sad. So, I'm just not going to drive anymore, just going to stay home. That makes sense to me, but I'm not sure it's not too extreme. So how avoidant do you want to be? If there's danger involved and it's imminent and it's obvious, I would say that's a clear case where you need to stay away. That's why I say if there's someone there, and I only know one person in the world who fits this criteria, but if there's that one person there who is toxic, I'm just going to stay away. You know, I think sometimes avoidance is a positive attribute, but I also think you take it too far. You see those two rectangles on the screen? Let's keep on talking if you want. Just click one of those two rectangles. The conversation will continue. If not, thanks for stopping by, and see y'all next time.